Hello, my name is Tom Baker, and I'll be giving this presentation on Ted Bundy for Miss Lori Battle's class, CRJ 490E, serial murders. So, who was Ted Bundy? Ted Bundy was born on November 24th, 1946, and was known at the time as Theodore Robert Colwell. His mother, Eleanor Louise Caldwell, had Ted Bundy out of wedlock. So his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Caldwell, raised him as their own for the longest time. Ted Bundy became one of the most well-known serial killers our country has ever seen. He committed crimes that involved the kidnapping, rape, and murder of his victims, and generally his victims were bludgeoned to death and strangled. Ted Bundy's early years were somewhat normal. He was a good student. He was involved in the local Methodist church. He was actually the VP of his youth group, and was well liked by everyone that really knew him. He was considered a good kid, very smart, and so on and so forth. It is also important to know that during his time, Ted's mother, Eleanor, remarried Johnny Culpepper Bundy. Mr. Culpepper Bundy adopted Ted as his own, and then Ted became Theodore Robert Bundy instead of Theodore Robert Colwell. These two went on to have more children. During that time, they moved. Ted did not feel a connection with his stepfather. As a matter of fact, Ted himself, in his own words, will tell you that he really didn't feel a connection with anybody. He didn't have that connection. He couldn't connect with people. But as most serial killers do, he could make it seem as if he understood people and were good with them. He was really good with people. After high school, which Ted did very good in, he was granted a scholarship to the University of Puget Sound, where he attended psychology classes. He later transferred to the University of Washington, in Washington State. While he was at Washington, the University of Washington, he met a young lady by the name of Stephanie Brooks, and this isn't her real name. It was hard for me. I could not find her real name, but this is the pseudonym that they gave. And they began a relationship, which later ended upon her graduation in 1968, and she left Ted Bundy because she said that he lacked ambition, no desire to go anywhere, that he wasn't going to do anything in life, and that didn't really sit well with Ted. After the breakup with Miss Brooks, Ted did turn himself around. He eventually graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology in 1972. At this time, he also worked at a local suicide hotline. People call up when they have problems thinking about killing themselves. And he was actually the ones that answered the phone. An interesting fact, Anne Rule, the lady who wrote The Stranger Beside Me, was Ted's partner in this. She knew him very well. She wrote that book, and she herself will admit that she had no idea what Ted was doing and how Ted was until the trials began in Florida. After that, he went to law school, and he went to law school in Utah, where some of his murders took place. He didn't do that well. He wasn't that good of a law student. He re-entered Miss Brooks's life, however, in 1973. Had a trip to California, re-entered her life. He was putting on a facade, obviously. And he ended up getting engaged to Miss Brooks that same year, and eventually left her around 1974, dropped all contact. She never heard from him again. And this is one of the earliest recorded killings from Ted Bundy started. Bundy's murder spree started in the state of Washington in 1974, although some Bundy researchers believe that he may have started killing in his early teens. What we do know is that he is connected to at least 36 murders that stretch across the United States from Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, and Florida. He was obviously a very smart man. He escaped twice from law enforcement in Colorado before he eventually was stopped in Florida for stealing a car, a Volkswagen Bug, which he was known to drive, and they were both a little yellowish in color. But it's really interesting how he escaped. Ted Bundy was to be tried in Aspen for the murders of an Aspen, Colorado girl, or excuse me, a girl from Colorado. He escaped. He chose to defend himself, and that allowed him access to the library to research his court case, the courthouse's library. Well, eventually Ted, found his way out of a window and ran. He was recaptured, trying to get out of Colorado and brought back to Aspen, where he escaped again, finding a way to escape out of the jailhouse itself. So there was no doubt that Mr. Bundy, Ted Bundy, was a very, very smart individual. Why did Ted start his killing spree? What drove him to that? Many who have studied Bundy believe that many of his issues stem from the feeling of being rejected. As he saw it, he wasn't really rejected. His stepfather and his mom took very good care of him, but as I said earlier, he did not have an emotional connection with people. So at the home, he felt his birth father rejected him. He never really knew who his birth father was until he went to the birth records, the place where they hold the birth records in Vermont, and found out who his father was. He also felt, he also did not feel, as I said earlier, connected to his stepfather, which could have been huge. Bundy, for the longest time, also didn't know that his real mother was his mother. As I said earlier in the presentation, he had been lied to. So Bundy had been living in a world of half-truths for a long time. He thought his grandparents were his real parents and his mother was his sister. So that could have had some kind of psychological effect. Many people believe that it was the rejection that pushed Bundy over the edge to start killing. And if you look at most of his victims, they all resemble Samantha Brooks. Pretty, hair parted in the middle, brunette hair, and most were very smart, and most all of them were college students. I think if I could remember through the reasons, the youngest one he killed was a Kimberly Leach in Lake City, Florida, after he escaped from custody in Colorado. Bundy was known as the campus killer. Bundy's murders were gruesome acts that only a disturbed individual obviously could commit. The rejection by Miss Brooks, as I stated earlier, is believed to be very important on why he started doing this. Bundy's victims, as I said earlier, very much resembled Miss Brooks, and of course they were attractive as well as was Miss Brooks. Ted Bundy did an interview while he was in prison, and it was, if you get a chance to watch it, it's very, very chilling. The one thing that he talked about, which he really believed drove him to do this, was his addiction to pornography. And not just any pornography. He liked to read violent pornography of rape and murder and stuff like that. And this is what Ted Bundy did. He raped and murdered his victims, bludgeoned them, strangled them with their own pantyhose sometimes. He was also known to revisit his crime scenes to have intercourse with the corpses of his victims. So he's also a necrophiliac, and he did remove heads and keep heads as mementos. So, with the combination of the rejection and his addiction to pornography, is very possible that that's what drove him over the edge. He also explained his home life, that he grew up in a good Christian family, as he described it. And that does seem to be the case. There is no doubt that Ted Bundy was an evil, deranged, handsome, charming, and very smart killer. In Washington, he managed to kill 6 women in a very short amount of time. He did the same thing in Utah and Colorado. Bundy managed to escape from law enforcement, as said earlier, and he eventually made his way down to Florida, where he committed the famous murders at the Chi Omega sorority house there. And eventually he went on to get caught. He got caught because he stole a car and he was pretty much pulled over. And this is the face of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was put to death in 1989, I want to say it was, in the electric chair. The last thing he said before he died was, "Give my love to my friends and family." And that was it. While in prison, though, Ted did confess to over 30 murders that they have not been proved that he did these, but there's no reason to think that he didn't do them. His murder count is at 36, but some believe there could be much more. Many more women that he killed. And this is Ted Bundy right here. Very evil man, very charismatic, and a very efficient killer. Knew what he was doing, planned everything out. And that is my presentation on Ted Bundy.